Many athletes have had to deal with racism on and off the pitch. It seems that the world can't go a week without another racist outburst. It's a subject that has caught the attention of governing bodies across all sports, with many staging campaigns to combat it. But the problem still persists. Hashtag Sport is Everyone is our campaign to try and change this.
Raheem Sterling is one of England's star football players, coming from a less than easy beginning to one of the world's best football players. But even when he's not playing for Manchester City or England, he still faces opposition in the form of racism. Sterling has been mocked in ways that has been personal and unrelenting. It was said by the media that he lacked balls and toughness, which has also been said about black football players in England, and it was said quite a lot about Sterling. Sterling has blamed the mainstream media for fueling racism, and it's hard to argue against him, with many athletes suffering discrimination because of their ethnicity.
For example, Romelu Lukaku said that when things were going well and he was scoring, the media, newspapers and social networks called him the Belgian striker. But when games in the season didn't go so well, they called him the Belgian striker of Congolese descent. He also said, "I would be surprised if there was a black man who says that in Belgium he doesn't experience racism." It's clear to see that racism is a big problem, and not just in sports but in everyday life for those affected.
Sport has been a place of escapism for decades, but many use this escape as a chance to vent racist views. This is disgustingly common, which is one of the key premises of critical race theory, that racism is not rare, that we do live in a racist society, and that we need to acknowledge it to fix it. It doesn't help when news outlets like Daily Mail condemn players like Tosin Adarabioyo, who bought a house for 2.2 million, using a seemingly negative headline towards him, while Phil Foden bought a house for his mum for near enough the same price, but was heralded by the same news site. This sort of discrimination just fuels the fire that readers already have towards people.
There is also the story of Costa Semenya. In 2009, in her first professional race, she won gold in the IAAF World Championships 800 meters in Berlin. But instead of people celebrating and praising her, they said she was a man and had an advantage because her testosterone level was too high. They didn't see her as the best in the world, or even an 8-year-old woman. They didn't see her as a human at all. They saw her as science, and they wanted to study her body. Here we can see another aspect of the critical race theory, when racial difference moving from descriptive elements to invisible factors, such as genes or hormones levels.
Something similar happened to Usain Bolt, who is sometimes seen as an athlete with more than human physicality. This is the kind of thing that often happens with black athletes. Some people, instead of giving value to the athlete due to training hard, prefer to say they have an advantage and treat them as an ungrateful sporting subject that owes its success to innate animalistic physiology. The truth is that non-white athletes are usually described for natural talents, and white athletes are described for intellectual/moral skills.
Although cases of racism in sport are mostly directed towards black athletes, there is also racism against other ethnicities, for example Asian athletes. The example of Shinji Kagawa when he played for Manchester United and the club's own fans were filmed singing a song about him in which they refer to the bombing of Pearl Harbor during the Second World War. Even if it doesn't have any negative intent, it still uses racial stereotypes. Casual racism still marginalizes and humiliates those targeted. One of critical race theory's core goals is for social injustice like this to cease.
Critical race theory states that we live in a racist society and need to acknowledge it rather than asking if we do. Its core goals are social justice and transformation, something these athletes feel like the sporting world desperately needs. Between the 18th and 20th century biology, race was seen as classification of certain physical features, like cheeks, nose, hair, and so on. The white race was seen as the top of the evolutionary ladder, with higher intelligence and moral skills, with the goal of civilizing other races. Rather than descriptive measurements, even now, 2/3 of science textbooks mention biophysical features as predictors or performance.
Another theory we can relate to this topic is symbolic interactionism. Colin Kaepernick is an American football player who famously kneeled during the American national anthem before a game. This action was equally admired as it was condemned. I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of colour. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. As time went on, more and more athletes began to kneel. This simple action caused storms in the media, with President Trump demanding that players that kneel get taken off the team or not paid.
An action that was supposed to raise awareness for how racial minorities were being treated became one of the most controversial topics of conversation. Nike started a campaign with Kaepernick, with the message being, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." This caused many Americans to burn Nike products, as many saw Kaepernick's actions as disrespectful to the flag and country. These people would rather criticize the actions because of the undying patriotism that's instilled with them from a very young age, rather than notice the bigger meaning behind it. These people acted on their own meaning of the kneeling by burning Nike products and venting their outrage. This is one of the tenets of symbolic interactionism, that our actions depend on the meaning that we put on something.
Conflict theory essentially states that due to there being limited resources, societies and economies must constantly compete with each other. This can lead to a culture of control, as figures with authority will often use their power against those who have no authority.
This can be applied to racism in sport, because we often see racism towards those with less authority, such as the players themselves. As these players are not in a position of power where they can discipline racist behaviour, they must often rely on the sports organisations to do so. However, this is where problems can be caused, and conflict theory can be applied, as the organisations often try to do as little as possible to seem like they're solving the problem, and would rather just brush over the issue of racism or just ignore it completely. This can cause conflict between players and organisations, and can often lead to players having to take a stand against racism themselves. For example, kneeling during the national anthem at NFL games, as we have previously stated.
Arguably, sports organisations are hesitant to reveal the full extent of racism that occurs in sport, and when they do accept the prevalence of racism, they do little to actually solve it. This can be understood by applying conflict theory, as the corporatization of sport means players are viewed simply as means of generating income, which means their well-being and needs are often overlooked. By treating sport as a business where players can be seen as resources, there is a constant struggle by players to ensure that adequate measures are in place to prevent racist abuse towards them, as organisations such as FIFA are willing to do as little as possible to actually help.
An example of players taking matters into their own hands is when many football players, such as Danny Rose, had to advise their families not to attend the 2018 FIFA World Cup due to racism directed towards black players and their families by Russian fans. This can only be seen as another instance of a lack of interventions from sports organizations to tackle racism, as players are having to take matters in their own hands.
Individuals in the sporting community, such as Piara Poir, the head of the Anti-Discrimination Fair Network, have even had to address the blatant racism, saying that there should be enough evidence of racism for FIFA to initiate proceedings. The fact that it comes down to people calling for FIFA to intervene shows that there is a constant conflict between organisation and those who wish to be able to participate in their sport, free from the hurling of racist abuse towards them. This conflict is related directly to conflict theory.
Although FIFA have given referees the power to suspend play until racist chants are ceased, and to even call a match off if they continue, racism is still prevalent in football today. One could argue that this new rule referees are able to enforce is an obvious attempt by FIFA to tackle racism. However, it seems to be a small change, which did little to mar the attacks of racism that players must face today, and can only further prove that organisations are doing little to address racism in sport, and that the conflict between players and organisations is only likely to continue.